There is a precise moment, high in the American Rockies, where the air turns so thin that engines gasp for breath and the human heart beats just a little. It is a place where the rules of the lowlands no longer apply, where winter does not merely visit, it resides. For centuries, this granite spine, the Continental Divide, was not simply a landmark, it was a wall. A formidable, snow-capped barricade that severed the nation, forcing to choose between a perilous climb over the jagged peaks or a detour of hundreds of miles. To the pioneers, it was a terrifying obstacle. To the early motorists of the 20th century, it was a gamble with gravity. But if you drive Interstate 70 today, about 60 miles west of Denver, you simply vanish into the side of a mountain and emerge, minutes later, in a different world. Welcome to the story of the Eisenhower Memorial Tunnel. To the casual, it is a mile and a half of fluorescent lights and exhaust fans. But to those who remember what came before, and to the historians who study the scars on the land, it is something far more profound. It is the highest vehicular tunnel in the world, a cathedral of engineering carved through the unyielding heart of a mountain that did not want to be conquered. Before we marvel at the concrete and the steel, we must first understand the silence. Picture, if you will, the Colorado high country in the early 1940s. The war was raging in Europe and the Pacific, and here at home, the West was still wild in ways that maps couldn't quite capture. If you lived on the western slope of Colorado, Denver might as well have been on the moon during the winter months. The state was effectively cut in two. The primary route over the divide was US Route 6, climbing up and over the notorious pass. Pass. Just the name brings a shiver to the spine of the old-timers who drove it in a rear-wheel drive sedan with bias-ply tires. It tops out at nearly 12,000 feet. It is a ribbon of asphalt draped over the precipice, exposed to winds that can peel the paint off a fender and snowdrifts that can bury a bus in an hour. In the dead of winter, crossing the divide wasn't a commute, it was an expedition. You packed blankets, extra food, and a shovel, and you said a prayer that the 7 Sisters, a series of deadly avalanche chutes, would remain asleep while you crept beneath them. I remember hearing stories from a retired truck driver, a man with hands like leather and eyes that had seen too many whiteouts. He told me that when the storms rolled in, the world simply disappeared. The road, the sky, the hood of your own truck, it all became a single shade of blinding white. You navigated by instinct and fear. And when the pass closed, which it did often, commerce stopped. Families were separated. The flow of American life hit a wall of ice. The Eisenhower Tunnel changed all of that. But it didn't just happen. It wasn't merely a construction project. It was a battle. It was a war waged between the audacity of American engineering and the geology of the Rocky Mountains. It is a story of men who risked their lives in the crushing dark, of water pressure so high it could snap steel beams like twigs, and of a vision to stitch a divided nation together with a 4-lane highway through the sky. This is not just a story about a hole in the ground. It is a story about the American refusal to accept the impossible. It is about the transition from the rugged, individual struggle of the pioneer days to the era of the interstate highway system, a time when we believed we could build our way out of any problem, no matter how high the mountain. As we embark on this journey together, we are going to peel back the layers of history. We will walk there with the surveyors who measured the peaks while fighting off frostbite. We will descend into the pilot bores where the rock groaned and shifted. We will meet the women and men who reshaped the geography of the West. And we will reflect on what we gained, and perhaps what we lost, when we tamed the savage high country. It is a privilege to guide you through these chapters of our shared past. History is not just dates and dead men. It is the echo of engines, the smell of diesel, and the triumph of the human spirit. If you love stories that take you back in time, stories that uncover the blood and sweat behind the concrete beneath your tires, hit subscribe so you won't miss the next journey. We have a long road ahead of us, winding through the darkness and into the light. So turn down the lights, settle into your chair, and let's travel back to a time when the Rockies were a fortress, and the idea of a tunnel at 11,000 feet was nothing more than a fever dream. Let's drive. To understand the tunnel, you must first understand the isolation. In the years following the Second World War, the state of Colorado was a house divided against itself. To the east lay Denver, the queen city of the plains, growing fat and prosperous on industry and trade. To the west lay the vast, resource-rich western slope, lands of peaches, uranium, and cattle, locked away behind a wall of granite that stood impregnable for half the year. The Continental Divide was not merely a geographical feature, it was an economic stranglehold. If you lived in Grand Junction or Springs, Denver felt as distant as Paris. You were cut off, orphaned by the snow. The dream of piercing that wall was old as the first steam locomotives that chugged and wheezed their way through the lower passes. But for the automobile, for the family station wagon and the interstate semi-truck, the dream seemed like madness. The altitude was too high, the rock too unstable, the cost too ruinous. It required a special kind of stubbornness to look at a mountain reaching 12,000 feet into the sky and say, "We're going to go right through it." That stubbornness found a name in C. Johnson. They called him Big Ede, a moniker that fit both his stature and his influence. He was a man of the West, rough-hewn and politically formidable, serving as both governor and senator for Colorado. Big Ede was not a man who took no for an answer, especially when that no came from Washington bureaucrats or timid engineers. He understood that without a reliable, all-weather link across the Rockies, the American West would never truly be united. He looked at the map, saw the tortuous twists of pass, and saw a bottleneck that was choking the life out of his state. There is a story often told in the dusty archives of the state capitol, a story that illustrates the sheer force of will required to move a mountain. In the mid-1950s, as the conversation about a tunnel stalled in committee meetings and budget hearings, Big Ede reportedly slammed his fist onto a heavy oak table. He wasn't interested in feasibility studies. He wasn't interested in the geologic uncertainties. He famously declared that if they had to, they would go up there with pickaxes and shovels and dig the thing themselves. It was political, perhaps, but it was rooted in a deep, populist conviction. He wanted a tunnel not just for commerce, but for the people, for the mother in rifle who needed a specialist in Denver, for the farmer who needed to get his crop to market before the frost set in. But Big Ede Johnson, for all his bluster, needed a mechanism. He needed a miracle of funding. And that miracle arrived in the form of a quiet, disciplined former general named Dwight D. Eisenhower. We often associate President Eisenhower with the interstate highway system. It bears his name, after all. But his connection to this specific struggle was personal, rooted in a memory that had haunted him for decades. In 1919, a young Lieutenant Colonel Eisenhower joined a transcontinental military convoy to test the mobility of the army. It was a disaster. It took them 62 days to cross the country. They were plagued by mud, broken bridges, and roads that were little more than cow paths. Eisenhower saw firsthand that a nation without roads was a nation vulnerable and disjointed. When he signed the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, authorizing the construction of 41,000 miles of interstate, he wasn't just thinking of. He was thinking of that mud. He was thinking of the efficiency of the German autobahns he had seen during the war. This legislation changed everything for Colorado. Suddenly, the federal government would pay 90% of the cost for interstate projects. The impossible became merely expensive. The pipe dream became a line item in a federal budget. Yet, even with the money and the political will, the question remained, where? Engineers and surveyors, men with slide rules and topographic maps, began a high-altitude game of chess with the Rockies. They scrambled over scree fields and dangled from ropes, measuring wind speeds and rock density. They looked at Pass. They looked at Jones Pass. But the data kept pointing them back to a spot near the existing pass, a drainage known as Straight Creek. It looked perfect on paper. It offered a significant reduction in elevation and shaved 10 miles off the journey. It seemed to be the path of least resistance. But mountains are deceptive. The surface of the Rockies is a mask. It hides the chaotic, fractured violence of the earth below. The geologists offered warnings. They spoke of bad rock. They spoke of shear zones where the earth had been ground to the consistency of talcum powder by of tectonic grinding. They warned that Straight Creek might be a trap. But the momentum was unstoppable. The West was booming. The ski industry was in its infancy, promising a gold rush of tourism if only the skiers could get to the slopes. The pressure to build was immense. Big E. Johnson, in his final term as governor, pushed the project past the point of no return. He wanted his legacy cemented in concrete. In the late 1950s, the decision was made. They would bore a hole beneath the Continental Divide at Straight Creek. It was an act of supreme confidence, bordering on arrogance. We believed, in that golden era of American industry, that there was no force of nature we could not engineer our way around, over, or through. We had split the atom. Surely, we could drill a hole in a rock. Little did they know, as the contracts were drawn and the heavy machinery began to rumble toward the high country, that they were not embarking on a simple construction project. They were walking into a geological ambush. The mountain was waiting for them. It was waiting with millions of tons of pressure, with rivers of freezing water hidden in the dark, and with a lesson in humility that would take a decade to learn. The visionaries had done their part. They had dreamed the dream and secured the gold. Now it was up to the workers, the miners, the sandhogs, the engineers, to confront the reality. The easy part was over. The battle for the bore was about to begin. If you have never stood inside a mountain while it is being hollowed out, it is difficult to imagine the sensation. It is not quiet. It is a cacophony of violence. It is the roar of Jumbo's massive drilling rigs, chewing into the rock face. It is the shudder of dynamite blasts that rattle your teeth and compress your chest. It is the smell of cordite, wet dust, and diesel fumes hanging heavy in the stagnant air. Construction began in earnest in the early 1960s, but not with the main tunnel. First, they had to dig a pilot bore, a smaller exploratory tunnel designed to test the rock conditions. It was supposed to be a reconnaissance mission, a way to peek behind the curtain before the main show began. Instead, it was a warning shot. The miners, tough men who had worked deep veins from Pennsylvania to Montana, quickly realized this was no ordinary job. They weren't digging through solid granite, the kind of predictable, hard rock that miners respect. They had stumbled into a geological nightmare. The geologists' fears about the Straight Creek fault were realized, and then some. In the heart of the mountain, the rock wasn't rock at all. It was a chaotic mess of gneiss and schist, ground up by ancient tectonic movements until it resembled clay or loose gravel. They called it squeezing ground. It's a terrifying term for a terrifying phenomenon. Imagine digging a hole in wet sand at the beach. As soon as you scoop it out, the sides rush in to fill the void. Now, imagine that sand is under thousands of feet of mountain, pressing down with millions of tons of force. As the miners advanced, the tunnel literally tried to close itself up behind them. Steel supports, massive I-beams as thick as a man's waist, were twisted into pretzels. Timbers snapped like matchsticks, the sound echoing through the darkness like gunshots. One engineer described watching a 12-inch steel beam bend until the flanges touched, the metal screaming under the impossible load. The mountain was alive. It was moving, and it was angry. The conditions were hellish. At 11,000 feet, the air outside was thin. Inside the tunnel it was choked with dust. But the water was worse. The mountain bled freezing water, gallons of it pouring from the ceiling and walls, soaking the men to the bone. It was 34 degrees Fahrenheit, just above freezing, and miserable. Men worked in slickers and high rubber boots, wadding through muck that could suck a boot right off your foot. I recall reading the diary of a shift foreman from those days. He wrote about the spookiness of the deep shifts. "You'd be drilling," he said, "and you'd hear a groan deep in the rock. Not a crack, but a groan, like the mountain was waking up. You'd look at the steel arches above your head, and you'd see fresh paint flacking off where the metal was starting to buckle. You didn't run, because where would you go? You just hoped the steel held for one more shift." This was the daily reality. Progress slowed to a crawl. There were days when they moved forward only a few feet, fighting for every inch. Sometimes they moved backward, forced to retreat and reinforce sections they had already dug as the mountain crushed their work. The engineering plans were daily. The cost estimates were thrown out the window. This wasn't construction anymore. It was improvisation. It was hand-to-hand combat with geology. But the most daunting challenge wasn't just the rock. It was the sheer scale of the logistics. Everything had to be hauled up the winding, treacherous roads to the portals. Cement, steel, explosives, food, coffee, tons of it every single day. And outside the tunnel mouth, the weather waged its own war. In winter, blizzards buried the equipment. Winds howled at 80 miles an hour, turning the construction site into an Arctic outpost. Mechanics had to keep engines running 24 hours a day, just to prevent the oil from turning into sludge. Yet, despite the crushing rock and the freezing cold, a strange camaraderie formed in the dark. These men were a breed apart. They were tunnel stiffs, proud of their scars and their survival. They shared a grim. They gave names to the worst sections of the tunnel, names that wouldn't pass the censors of public television. They looked out for one another because, in the squeezing ground, your life depended on the man next to you hearing the rock move before it fell. There were moments of genuine despair, moments when the engineers wondered if the project was even possible. The mountains seemed to be winning. The pilot bore revealed that nearly half of the tunnel's length ran through this unstable, treacherous rock. The in Denver and Washington grew. Critics called it a boondoggle, a tunnel to nowhere. But surrender wasn't in the vocabulary of that generation. They innovated. They developed new methods of reinforcement using shifting forms and steel than had ever been used in tunnel construction before. They pumped grout into the crumbling rock to glue it together. They fought back with chemistry and physics. It took years of struggle, cost overruns that made headlines, and a stubborn refusal to quit. But slowly, painfully, the pilot bore punched through. When daylight finally broke through from the other side, it wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was proof that the mountain could be pierced. But the main event, the massive bores that would carry the interstate highway, was still to come. And the mountain, wounded and shifting, was waiting for round two. As the 1960s wore on, the project became a race. A race against rising costs, against political patience, and against the needs of a nation on the move. The story of the construction is a testament to the fact that sometimes the only way out is through, even if through means digging straight into the teeth of a disaster. To truly understand the magnitude of the Eisenhower Tunnel, you cannot simply look at the hole in the wall. You must experience the pilgrimage to reach it. The journey begins miles below, where the Great Plains finally surrender to the foothills. As you drive west from Denver, the horizon lifts and the world tilts upward. But the true drama, the prelude to the tunnel itself, begins at the historic mining town of Georgetown. Here, the interstate performs a feat of gymnastics that rivals the tunnel itself. It is a steep, punishing climb. To your left, nestled in the deep valley, lies Georgetown, a Victorian jewel box of a town that seems frozen in the silver boom of the 1880s. You can see the rooftops of the Hotel Paris and the old courthouse, tiny as from your vantage point on the highway. It is a stark juxtaposition. The roaring, modern interstate soaring above the quiet, narrow streets of the 19th century. It is here that you realize you are leaving the ordinary world behind. As the road winds upward, passing the ghostly remnants of the town of Silverplume, You are tracing the footsteps of the old narrow-gauge railroads. If you look closely at the mountainsides, you can still see the faint scars of the old rail beds, the Georgetown Loop, where steam engines once huffed and puffed to gain elevation. Today, our 300 horsepower engines make the climb with ease, but the gravity is the same. You feel it in the heaviness of the steering wheel, in the popping of your ears. Then there are the runaway truck ramps. They appear on the descent, but their presence looms large in the mind of every driver on the ascent. Great gravel chutes shooting off the side of the highway, steep and terrifying, designed to catch a semi-truck whose brakes have failed. They are monuments to gravity, silent reminders that even with our modern engineering, the mountain still holds the trump card. Seeing the tire tracks in the deep gravel of a ramp is a sobering sight, a frozen moment of panic and salvation. The road curves, the trees thin out, becoming scrubby and resilient, and finally you see it, the east portal. It does not look like a simple tunnel entrance. It looks like a fortress. The ventilation buildings, massive structures of concrete and steel, stand like sentinels guarding the gate to the underworld. They are brutalist and imposing, designed not for beauty, but for the brute force task of inhaling millions of cubic feet of exhaust and exhaling fresh mountain air. They loom over the highway, they're dark and mysterious, housing fans the size of wheels. To a child watching from the backseat in 1975, this looked like the entrance to a secret base, a place where science fiction met reality. Crossing the threshold into the tunnel is a sensory shock. The expansive blue sky and the blinding white snow are instantly replaced by an artificial twilight. The sound changes first. The wind noise vanishes, replaced by the rhythmic thrum-thrum-thrum of tires on concrete and the amplified roar of engines echoing off the curved walls. For a mile and a half, you are inside the mountain. The walls are lined with ceramic tiles, millions of them. In the early days, they were pristine and white. Over time, they have been scrubbed and replaced, a mosaic of maintenance. The lighting is hypnotic, a rhythmic flashing of overhead fixtures that induces a trance-like state. You are traveling at 60 miles per hour, yet you feel suspended in a capsule, disconnected from the earth above. About halfway through, you pass a green sign bolted to the curved wall. It is unassuming, easy to miss if you blink, but it marks one of the most significant geographical boundaries on the continent. Continental Divide. Elevation 11,158 feet. Pause to consider that sign. Above your head lies nearly 2,000 feet of solid granite. Above that, the winds of pass are howling. But here, in the warm, dry air of the tunnel, you are crossing the spine of the Americas. It is a watershed moment, quite literally. A drop of water falling on one side of this invisible line eventually finds its way to the Atlantic Ocean. A drop on the other side flows to the Pacific. To cross it in a matter of seconds, without shifting gears, is a triumph that defies the logic of geography. Deep within the walls, unseen by is the nerve center of the operation, the control room. It is a space filled with monitors and switches, staffed 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. These operators are the guardians of the tunnel. They watch for the stalled car, the overheating engine, the debris in the lane. They control the traffic lights that can stop the flow of vehicles in an instant. They monitor the carbon monoxide levels, adjusting the massive lungs of the ventilation system to ensure the air remains breathable. They are the silent pilots of this subterranean ship. And then, just as your eyes have adjusted to the artificial glare, the light at the end of the tunnel appears. It grows from a pinprick to a blinding arch. You burst out of the west portal, and the world expands violently. You are now in the watershed of the Colorado River. The view is breathtaking. The Gore Range rises in the distance, jagged and wild. Below lies the reservoir, a sapphire jewel cradled in the valley. The descent into Summit County is a release, a sigh of relief. You have cheated the mountain. You have passed through the wall. For the locals, these landmarks, the towering ventilation stacks, the tile walls, the green divide sign, are part of the daily commute. But for the first time, they are the beats of a dramatic story. The tension of the climb, the enclosure of the tunnel, and the liberation of the exit. It is a journey that compresses the grandeur of the American West into a 15-minute experience. Every time you drive it, you are participating in a ritual. You are tracing the path of the miners, the railroaders, and the dreamers, but you are doing it with a speed and safety they could scarcely imagine. The tunnel transforms the terrifying barrier of the divide into a mere checkpoint, a brief interlude in the journey. But if you look up as you enter the darkness, if you respect the weight of the rock above you, you can still feel the power of the place. It is a landmark not built on the land, but in it, a permanent scar and a permanent bridge carved into the roof of the world. If engineering is the muscle of infrastructure, then politics is surely the nervous system. The Eisenhower Tunnel was not willed into existence simply because we had the technology. It was fought for, bargained for, and leveraged in the smoky of Denver and Washington, D.C. It stands today as a monument to the complex, often messy intersection of ambition, economics, and the changing cultural identity of the American West. By the mid-1960s, the tunnel had become more than a construction project. It was a political football. The costs were skyrocketing. The squeezing ground that was crushing steel beams was also crushing the budget. Initial estimates had been optimistic, perhaps intentionally so, to get the project approved. But as the bills mounted, millions upon millions of dollars over budget, the grumbling in Congress grew louder. Why, representatives from flat states asked, should federal taxpayers pour money into a hole in a Colorado mountain? This is where the story of the tunnel becomes a story of influence. It required a unified front from Western politicians to keep the funding flowing. It wasn't just about Colorado anymore. It was about the strategic importance of the interstate highway system. It was framed as a matter of national, of interstate commerce, of connecting the coasts. The arguments shifted from local convenience to national necessity. But the local politics were just as fierce. The tunnel reshaped the power dynamics of Colorado itself. For decades, the western slope, the vast, rural region west of the divide, had felt neglected, a poor cousin to the booming Front Range. The tunnel was their lifeline. It promised to bring tourists, skiers, and investment. It promised to turn sleepy mining towns like Vale into world-class destinations. And indeed, the cultural impact was seismic. Before the tunnel, skiing was a niche sport for the adventurous. The drive to the slopes was arduous, the passes treacherous. The tunnel democratized the mountains. Suddenly, a family in a station wagon could leave Denver in the morning, ski all day, and be home for dinner. This accessibility birthed the modern ski industry as we know it. It transformed the culture of Colorado from mining and agriculture to recreation and tourism. The ski bum lifestyle, the condos, the chalets, they all owe a debt to that hole in the rock. However, this transformation was not without its tensions. The tunnel acted as a funnel pouring urban growth into rural valleys. Old-timers on the western slope watched with mixed emotions as their quiet towns were inundated with front rangers and out-of-state developers. Land prices soared. The character of the communities changed overnight. The tunnel brought prosperity, yes, but it also brought traffic, crowds, and the relentless pace of the city into the sanctuary of the mountains. It was the classic Western story, the double-edged sword of progress. There were also battles over the name. Originally, it was simply the Straight Creek Tunnel. Functional, descriptive, boring. But in 1968, after the assassination of Martin King and the death of Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1969, the naming of public works took on a heavy symbolic weight. The decision to name the westbound bore after Eisenhower was a fitting tribute to the father of the Interstate System. But the eastbound bore, completed years later, needed a name too. It was named after C. Johnson Big Ede, the local bulldog who had fought for it. Thus, the official name is the Eisenhower Johnson Memorial Tunnel. It is a perfect duality, one name for the national vision, one for the local grit. A balance of federal power and state pride, enshrined in concrete. Perhaps the most fascinating cultural subplot involves the tunnel's role in the women's rights movement. During construction, a woman named was hired by the Colorado Department of Highways as an engineering technician. She was qualified, eager, and ready to work. There was just one problem, an ancient superstition held by the miners. They believed that a woman entering a tunnel brought bad luck, that the mountain would become jealous and collapse. Was barred from entering the tunnel she was helping to build. She was told to do her work from the office, while her male counterparts went underground. It was 1972. The world was changing, but in the dark, damp world of the tunnel stiffs, the old superstitions held firm, didn't accept it. She filed a lawsuit, citing gender discrimination. The case became a flashpoint. It wasn't just about one woman and one tunnel. It was about whether women had a place in the rugged, dangerous world of heavy construction. Won her case. When she finally walked into the tunnel, flanked by reporters and wary miners, the roof did not collapse. The mountain did not shudder. The work went on. Her quiet victory was a cultural breakthrough, paving the way for women in trades and engineering across the country. The Eisenhower Tunnel, a symbol of physical connection, also became a site of social progress. The tunnel also forced a reckoning with environmental politics. The sheer scale of the waste rock, millions of tons of it, had to go somewhere. The construction scars were visible for miles. As the environmental movement gained traction in the 1970s, the practices used at the tunnel came under scrutiny. It marked a turning point in how we build major infrastructure. We could no longer just blast and dump. We had to consider the watershed, the wildlife, the aesthetics. The tunnel was one of the last giants of the brute force era, but it also ushered in the era of environmental impact statements and reclamation. So, when you drive through that tunnel today, you are driving through a vortex of history. You are passing through a space carved not just by dynamite, but by the political will of a nation, the economic dreams of a region, the struggle for gender equality, and the shifting values of the American West. It is a mile and a half where the abstract forces of culture and politics harden into physical reality. The tunnel didn't just connect two sides of a mountain, it connected the past to the future. Behind the cold statistics of tons moved, dynamite blasted, and concrete poured, there is always a human price. History is often written in broad strokes, but it is lived in the details, in the calloused hands of a shift worker, in the held breath of a mother driving a station wagon on an icy road, and in the empty chair at a dinner table where a father used to sit. The Eisenhower Tunnel is a marvel of engineering, yes, but it is also a vessel of human memory, filled with stories of sacrifice, terror, and relief. We must speak first of the men who built it. They called themselves sandhogs or tunnel stiffs. They were a migratory breed of hard rock miners who followed the big jobs across the country, from the dams of the Pacific to the subways of New York. They were men who lived a life of calculated risk. Every time they stepped into the cage to descend into the mountain, they knew the odds. They knew that the squeezing ground of the Continental Divide did not care about their plans for the future. 7 men died building the first bore of the Eisenhower Tunnel. 7 lives extinguished in the dark. It is easy to gloss over that number, to treat it as an acceptable loss in a project of such magnitude. But we must pause to remember that these were men with names, with families, with dreams. They were crushed by falling rock, struck by heavy machinery, or lost to the unforgiving hazards of the industrial underground. I spoke once with the son of a miner who worked the graveyard shift during the worst years of the construction. He remembered his father coming home in the pale light of dawn, his face grey with rock dust, his eyes hollowed out by the strain of listening to the mountain groan. He told me that his father never spoke much about the work. He would simply sit on the porch, smoke a cigarette, and stare at the peaks in the distance, as if he were trying to make peace with the giant he was fighting. The son said, "My dad didn't build a tunnel. He survived a war." That is the legacy etched into the walls, a legacy of grit and survival that most of us will never fully comprehend as we speed through at 60 miles an hour. But the human story of the tunnel is also the story of those who use it, the millions for whom the tunnel was a salvation. To appreciate this, you have to tap into the collective memory of a generation that remembers the old way. Ask anyone over the age of 60 about driving past in a blizzard in 1965 and watch their eyes widen. It was a rite of passage. It was a white-knuckled, heart-pounding ordeal. I have heard stories of families packed into rear-wheel drive sedans, creeping along the edge of the abyss with zero visibility. The father would be hunched over the steering wheel, silent and tense, while the mother prayed in the passenger seat, gripping the dashboard until her fingers turned white. The children in the back would be eerily quiet, sensing the danger in the air. One woman shared a memory with me that captures the essence of this era. She was 10 years old, traveling with her parents from Kansas to see the mountains for the first time. They hit a storm on the approach to the pass. The windshield wipers were useless against the heavy, wet snow. Her father had to stop the car on a steep incline to put on tire chains. She watched through the foggy glass as he struggled in the freezing wind, his hands numb, the headlights of oncoming trucks looming out of the white void like monsters. She said she had never felt so small, so fragile in the face of nature. For those families, the opening of the Eisenhower Tunnel was not just a convenience, it was a miracle. It changed the psychology of travel. The first time they drove through, bypassing the terrifying switchbacks and the avalanche chutes, it felt like cheating death. The tunnel offered a womb of safety, a predictable, dry, lit path through the chaos of the high country. It transformed a journey of fear into a journey of wonder. There are also the stories of the truckers, the knights of the highway who keep the blood of commerce flowing. Before the tunnel, a winter crossing was a gamble with their livelihood and their lives. If the pass closed, they were stranded for days, losing money, burning fuel to stay warm. The tunnel gave them reliability, but it also gave them a new challenge. Stopping a fully loaded 18-wheeler on the steep descent out of the tunnel requires a mastery of physics and nerve. Every trucker has a story of a hot run, where the brakes started to smoke, and the smell of burning lining filled the cab, and they had to make the split-second decision to ride it out or hit the runaway ramp. And let us not forget the people who work there today. The tunnel is a living organism that requires constant care. There are mechanics who walk the ventilation ducts, electricians who replace the thousands of bulbs, and emergency responders who are stationed at the portals, ready to rush into the smoke if a fire breaks out. They are the modern custodians of the mountain. They see the accidents, the breakdowns, and the bizarre moments, like the time a bear wandered into the westbound bore, stopping traffic and baffling the control room operators. These stories, the tragic, the terrifying, the triumphant, are the ghosts that inhabit the concrete. When you drive through the Eisenhower Tunnel, you are not alone. You are accompanied by the spirits of the 7 men who didn't make it out. You are following the tire tracks of the frightened families who conquered the pass before you. You are part of a human chain that stretches back decades, united by the desire to see what lies on the other side of the range. It is personal. It is the story of a honeymoon couple driving west to start a new life. It is the story of a soldier returning home to the western slope. It is the story of a skier catching the first powder of the season. The road is the stage upon which these quiet, intimate dramas play out, day after day, year after year. Have you or your family ever traveled a road with a story like this? Perhaps you remember the old pass, or maybe you have your own memory of the first time you entered the great bore of the Eisenhower. Share it in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories and keep this oral history alive. Because in the end, infrastructure is just stone and steel until we pour our lives into it. The Eisenhower Tunnel is more than a hole in the ground. It is a testament to our need to connect, to explore, and to return home safely. And for those who know its history, every passage through the dark is a moment of gratitude. If the construction of the Eisenhower Tunnel was a war, then the weapons were forged in the fires of innovation. This was not a project that could be solved with brute force alone. The squeezing ground demanded a level of engineering ingenuity that had rarely been seen in civil construction. It forced the brightest minds of the era to rewrite the textbooks on tunneling. To appreciate the engineering feat, we must first appreciate the ventilation. A tunnel of this length 7 miles. At this altitude presents a deadly problem: carbon monoxide. In the thin air of 11,000 feet, engines burn fuel inefficiently, spewing out higher concentrations of toxic gas. If you simply dug a hole and let cars drive through it, the tunnel would become a gas chamber within minutes. The solution was to build a building inside the mountain. Above the traffic lanes, hidden from the driver's view by a false ceiling, is a massive air duct system. It is divided into two sections, one for pumping in fresh air, the other for sucking out exhaust. The scale is staggering. The fans that drive this system are not like the ones in your window. They are behemoths, 3 stories tall, capable of moving millions of cubic feet of air per minute. They are monitored by sensors that sniff the air constantly. If the carbon monoxide levels rise, the fans spin up, creating a windstorm in the ceiling that scrubs the tunnel clean. It is a respiratory system for a concrete giant, keeping the air breathable in the heart of a granite tomb. But the true marvel lies in how they kept the tunnel from collapsing during construction. The traditional method of drill and blast simply wasn't working in the worst sections of the Straight Creek Fault. The rock was too fractured. It flowed like a viscous liquid. The engineers had to get creative. They employed a technique called the multiple drift method. Imagine you are trying to dig a large tunnel through a sandcastle. If you dig the whole thing at once, it collapses. So instead, you dig a series of small, reinforced tunnels around the perimeter of where the big tunnel will be. You fill these small tunnels with concrete. Eventually, you have created a ring of concrete, a hollow cylinder buried in the earth. Only then do you dig out the center. This is essentially what they did, but on a colossal scale, under millions of tons of pressure. It was slow, painstaking work, like building a ship inside a bottle while the bottle is being shaken. The engineers also had to contend with the water. The mountain was essentially a sponge. To manage the immense hydrostatic pressure, they drilled weep holes and installed drainage systems that channeled the freezing water away from the tunnel walls. If they hadn't, the water pressure would have built up behind the concrete lining until it imploded the tunnel. Today, beneath the road deck you drive on, there is a hidden river flowing, the drainage of the Continental Divide, tamed and redirected by human hands. Another innovation came in the form of the shield. In the softest, most dangerous ground, they used a massive steel cylinder, a shield, that was pushed forward by hydraulic jacks. The miners worked inside this protective shell, digging out the rock in front, while the shield held up the mountain. As they moved forward, they erected the permanent steel and concrete lining behind them. It was an inch-by-inch crawl, a mechanical earthworm eating its way through the fault zone. The precision required was mind-bending. They were digging from both sides of the mountain, the east portal and the west portal, aiming to meet in the middle. In a 1.7-mile tunnel curving through the earth, a misalignment of even a few inches would have been a disaster. The surveyors had to account for the curvature of the earth, the gravitational anomalies caused by the mass of the mountain, and the refraction of light in the thin air. When the two crews finally broke through and met in the dark, the alignment was off by only a fraction of an inch. It was a bullseye shot from 2 miles away, blindfolded. And let us not forget the heating system, not for the air, but for the road. The approaches to the tunnel are heated to prevent ice from forming. Miles of piping run beneath the pavement, circulating hot fluid. This ensures that even when the blizzard is raging outside, the entrance to the tunnel remains dry and safe. It is a luxury we take for granted, but in the 1970s, it was space-age technology applied to asphalt. The Eisenhower Tunnel also pioneered the use of closed-circuit television for traffic management. The control room was one of the first of its kind, a centralized brain that could see every inch of the roadway. Before this, tunnel monitoring was done by men walking the beat. The introduction of cameras and electronic sensors moved traffic management into the modern era, setting the standard for every major tunnel built since. Every bolt, every tile, every fan blade in that tunnel is a solution to a problem that said stop. The engineers didn't just build a road, they built a machine that breathes, drains, heats, and monitors itself. It is a triumph of systems engineering, where geology, fluid dynamics, thermodynamics, and structural mechanics all have to dance together in perfect synchronization. When you drive through today, look at the ceiling. Think about the hurricane of air rushing above your head. Look at the walls. Think about the ring of concrete holding back the crushing weight of the divide. It is a silent, static display of dynamic forces held in check by human ingenuity. It is the proof that when we are pushed to the brink by nature, our capacity to innovate is boundless. The mountains said, no. But the engineers, with their slide rules and their grit, found a way to say yes. A tunnel once bored seems like a permanent thing, a fixed point in a changing world. But the Eisenhower Tunnel has not stood still. It has evolved, expanded, and adapted, mirroring the growth of the nation it serves. The story of the tunnel didn't end when the ribbon was cut. In many ways, that was just the beginning of a long, complex maturation. When the first bore, the one we now know as the Eisenhower Memorial Bore, opened to traffic on March 8, 1973, it was a revelation. But it was also a bottleneck. For 6 long years, the tunnel operated as a 2-lane road, with 1 lane of traffic heading east and 1 heading west. Imagine the tension of driving into that dark tube, seeing the headlights of oncoming semi-trucks just a few feet away, separated only by a double yellow line. The claustrophobia was real. The air was thick with exhaust, despite the massive fans, and the traffic jams leading up to the portals were legendary. On winter weekends, the line of cars waiting to enter could stretch for miles, engines idling, skiers fuming. It became clear almost immediately that 1 hole wasn't enough. The volume of traffic exploded beyond all projections. The tunnel had unleashed a torrent of demand. So the construction crews barely had time to pack up their gear before they were called back. They had to dig a second tunnel. The second bore, running parallel to the first, was named the C. Johnson Memorial Bore. Construction began in 1975 and finished in 1979. This time, the engineers were armed with the hard-won lessons of the first dig. They knew where the squeezing ground was. They knew how the mountain would react. The second bore was completed, safer, and with fewer surprises, though the geology remained as stubborn as ever. When it opened, the relief was palpable. Finally, Interstate 70 was a true 4-lane highway all the way through the Rockies. The dangerous game of chicken in the single tunnel was over. Now, traffic could flow freely, 2 lanes west in the Eisenhower, 2 lanes east in the Johnson. But the evolution didn't stop with the second tunnel. The route itself has seen constant modification. The approaches to the tunnel, the steep grades on either side, have been the subject of endless engineering tweaks. The runaway truck ramps were improved and relocated as truck speeds and weights increased. The lighting system, originally high-pressure sodium bulbs that cast everything in a sickly orange glow, has been gradually upgraded to modern LEDs. These new lights are not just brighter, they are smarter. They can be adjusted to match the brightness of the sun outside, reducing the black hole effect that blinds drivers entering the tunnel on a sunny day. Signage, too, has evolved. In the early days, simple painted signs warned drivers to turn on their headlights. Today, variable message boards flash real-time warnings about accidents, ice, or closures. The tunnel has become a smart highway, communicating with the drivers who pass through it. Perhaps the most significant, though invisible, evolution has been in the realm of fire safety. The catastrophic tunnel fires in Europe in the late 1990s and early 2000s, in the tunnels, sent shockwaves through the engineering community. The Eisenhower Tunnel was with state-of-the-art fire suppression systems. Heat detectors were installed that can pinpoint a fire within seconds. A deluge system was added, capable of dumping thousands of gallons of water on a specific zone to smother a blaze before it can turn the tunnel into a furnace. The numbering system of the highway also tells a story of evolution. Originally, this route was just a dotted line on a planner's map. Then it was a construction zone. Then it was a segment of I-70. Today, it is part of the high-priority corridor network, recognized as vital to the national economy. The exit numbers have changed, shifting from sequential numbers to mile-marker-based numbers, aligning Colorado with the federal standard. Each change in signage, each coat of paint, is a layer of history. Even the rules of the road have changed. For years, hazardous materials trucks were strictly forbidden from the tunnel, forced to take the treacherous pass regardless of the weather. But as the pass became more crowded and dangerous, a compromise was reached. Now, hazmat trucks are allowed through the tunnel, but only at specific times and under strict escort protocols, usually when the pass is closed. Watching a convoy of fuel tankers being escorted through the empty tunnel in the dead of night is a surreal sight, a silent, creeping procession of volatile energy. The tunnel has also had to adapt to the changing nature of the vehicles themselves. In the 1970s, it was muscle cars and station wagons. Today, it's electric vehicles and massive SUVs. The ventilation systems are now being re-evaluated not just for carbon monoxide, but for the complex chemistry of modern exhaust and the potential fire risks of lithium-ion batteries. The tunnel is a mirror reflecting the technological shifts of the automotive world. There is a sense of organic growth to the place. It is not a static monument. It is a living piece of infrastructure that learns. It learned that 2 lanes weren't enough. It learned that fire is the ultimate enemy. It learned that light helps the human eye adapt to darkness. And it continues to learn. Engineers are currently studying the long-term effects of the mountain's pressure on the concrete liners, planning for renovations that will keep the tunnel safe for another 50 years. The Eisenhower Tunnel of today is a different beast than the one that opened in 1973. It is smarter, safer, and more robust. But if you strip away the LEDs and the digital sensors, the core challenge remains the same. It is still a small, fragile tube of air defying the crushing weight of the Earth. The evolution of the tunnel is the story of our constant negotiation with that reality, a negotiation that never truly ends. You might not think of a concrete tube deep in the Rockies as a pop culture icon, but the Eisenhower Tunnel has a way of showing up in the American imagination. It sits at such a dramatic intersection of geography and travel that it has become a shorthand for crossing into the West. It has been the backdrop for movies, the subject of urban legends, and a milestone for famous figures. Take, for instance, the world of cinema. Hollywood loves a dramatic mountain setting, and the tunnel provides the perfect threshold. While not always named explicitly, the tunnel, or its likeness, appears in films that need to convey a journey into the wild. It's that moment of transition, the cinematic fade to black, that transports characters from the civilized world to the rugged frontier. But perhaps the most famous connection isn't fictional at all. It involves the king of cool himself, Steve Queen. There is a persistent local legend that Queen, an avid motorcycle enthusiast and speed freak, once took a high-performance bike through the tunnel before it was officially open to the public. The story goes that he charmed his way past the construction guards, or perhaps simply outran them, to experience the echo of a racing engine in the pristine, empty bore. Whether true or just a tall tale spun over beers in a Georgetown saloon, it fits the mythos of the place. The tunnel calls to those who love speed and the open road. Then there is the darker side of pop culture, the disaster genre. In the novel The Stand by Stephen King, the tunnel, though geographically shifted and reimagined, serves as a terrifying choke point, a tomb for those trying to escape her. King, who lived in Boulder, understood the psychological weight of the tunnel. He knew that for Coloradans, the tunnel represents the only way out. If it closes, you are trapped. He into that primal fear of being buried alive, of the lights going out in the middle of the mountain. The tunnel also holds a strange place in the history of the American road trip. It is a checklist item for the weird and wonderful community of high pointers and infrastructure geeks. There are people who travel the country specifically to drive through engineering marvels. For them, the Eisenhower is the holy grail, the highest point on the entire interstate highway system. You will often see them at the pull-offs near the portals, snapping photos not of the mountains, but of the ventilation buildings. Even the music world has a loose connection. Touring bands, the country in vans and buses, treat the tunnel as a major landmark. It's the long climb that tests the transmission of the tour bus. Mention the Eisenhower to a roadie for a 70s rock band, and they'll likely groan and tell you a story about overheating a radiator or blowing a tire just as they hit the east portal. It is part of the folklore of the road, a shared struggle that binds musicians, truckers, and drifters together. And let's not forget the politicians and dignitaries. When the tunnel opened, it was a major national event. Everyone who was anyone wanted to be seen cutting the ribbon. It was a symbol of American prowess during the Cold War. Look, the message seemed to be, the Soviets are putting men in space, but we are moving mountains. It was a projection of strength. Presidents and governors have used the tunnel as a backdrop for speeches about infrastructure and unity. It is a potent stage. There is also a quirky connection to the Brewing dynasty. The water that drains from the tunnel flows into the Clear Creek watershed, which eventually makes its way down to Golden, Colorado, home of the brewery. While the brewery uses its own springs, the joke among locals for years was that the Rocky Mountain spring water had traveled through the same mountain as the interstate traffic. It's a humorous reminder of how connected the ecosystem is. In the age of social media, the tunnel has found a new life. Search for it on Instagram or Tik, and you will find thousands of videos. Dashcam footage of the drive, time-lapses of the lights into streaks of neon, and selfies taken by passengers holding their breath, a common childhood game that has migrated to the internet. The Tunnel Breath Challenge, trying to hold your breath for the entire 1.7 miles, is a rite of passage that has gone viral. It connects the digital generation to the physical experience of the road in a playful way. One cannot discuss famous connections without mentioning the wildlife. The area around the portals is a migration corridor for elk, bighorn sheep, and mountain goats. These animals are the original celebrities of the high country. There is a famous photo, widely circulated, of a bighorn sheep standing atop the concrete portal, looking down at the rushing traffic with a regal, unimpressed expression. It captures the essence of the tunnel, nature and machine existing side by side in an uneasy truce. The Eisenhower Tunnel has become a character in the American story. It is not just a piece of infrastructure. It is a setting, a symbol, and a challenge. It has been driven by movie stars, written about by horror masters, and memed by teenagers. It transcends its function as a road and enters the realm of cultural landmark. If you love hidden histories behind familiar names and places, and want to know more about the strange and fascinating intersections of road and culture, subscribe. We uncover stories like this every week. Because every road has a legend, and some of them are buried deep inside a mountain. Today, the Eisenhower Johnson Memorial Tunnel is not a relic. It is a juggernaut. It is the beating heart of Colorado's economy and a critical artery for the nation. Every single day, over 30,000 vehicles pass through its bores. On peak summer weekends or during the height of ski season, that number can swell to over 50,000. It is a river of steel and rubber that never stops flowing. Stand at the overlook near the West Portal today, and you are watching the lifeblood of the American West in motion. You will see everything: sleek electric sedans from California, battered pickup trucks from Wyoming, family SUVs packed with camping gear, and the endless convoy of 18-wheelers carrying everything from Amazon packages to fresh produce. The tunnel makes modern life in the mountains possible. Without it, the grocery stores in Summit County would be empty in winter. The gas stations would run dry. The billion-dollar ski industry would collapse into a niche hobby. But the tunnel's impact goes beyond logistics. It has fundamentally reshaped the demographics of Colorado. Because of the tunnel, the commuter corridor now extends deep into the mountains. People live in or Frisco and commute to Denver for work, a concept that would have been laughable 50 years ago. The tunnel has shrunk the geography of the state, turning distant mountain towns into suburbs of the metropolis. This convenience, however, has come at a cost. The I-70 parking lot is a modern phenomenon that every Coloradan knows and dreads. On a Sunday afternoon in winter, the drive from the ski resorts back to Denver, a trip that should take 90 minutes, can take 4 or 5 hours. The tunnel, for all its capacity, is still a funnel. When thousands of skiers leave the slopes at the same time, the tunnel becomes the choke point. It is a victim of its own success. The ease of access has invited more people than the infrastructure can comfortably handle. Yet, even in the gridlock, the tunnel commands respect. It is one of the most monitored stretches of highway in the world. The control room, now upgraded with optics and high-definition screens, is like the bridge of a starship. Operators use thermal imaging to spot overheating brakes before they catch fire. They use algorithms to pace traffic, using miles away to meter the flow of cars so that traffic never comes to a standstill inside the tunnel. It is a constant, high-stakes ballet of traffic management. The physical presence of the tunnel has also aged gracefully, thanks to relentless maintenance. The tile walls are washed regularly by specialized trucks with rotating brushes, a giant car wash for a tunnel. The pavement is heated, milled, and replaced with surgical precision to minimize closures. Even the avalanche control above the tunnel has been modernized. Today, instead of just using surplus artillery shells to shoot down snow, they use remote-controlled gas cannons installed on the peaks to trigger controlled slides, keeping the approaches safe without putting workers in harm's way. There is also a growing awareness of the tunnel's environmental legacy. The Colorado Department of Transportation has built massive sediment ponds below the tunnel to catch from the road. The sand, salt, and oil that wash off the cars are trapped and filtered before the water is released into Clear Creek. It is a recognition that we have a responsibility to the land we bored through. In the towns below, the tunnel is a constant topic of conversation. "How's the tunnel?" is a standard greeting. Apps and websites dedicated to tunnel traffic are checked obsessively. It dictates the rhythm of life. A closure due to an accident sends ripples through the entire region. Dinner reservations are cancelled, meetings are missed, kids are late for school. The tunnel is the clock by which the high country sets its watch. For the modern, the experience is seamless, almost mundane. We stream podcasts and talk on hands-free phones as we drive through the heart of the Continental Divide. We forget the terror of the old pass. We forget the squeezing ground. We take the miracle for granted. But there are reminders. If you stop at the pull-off on the east side, you will find a bronze statue of Dwight D. Eisenhower and C. Johnson. They stand there, frozen in metal, looking towards the tunnel they championed. Nearby, there are plaques the workers who died. These markers are small islands of history in a sea of rushing traffic. They ask us to pause, just for a moment, and acknowledge the cost of our convenience. The tunnel also serves as a stark reminder of our dependence on infrastructure. When it closes, which it still does, for accidents or extreme weather, the illusion of mastery over nature vanishes. We are suddenly reminded that we are small and the mountains are big. The traffic stops, the silence returns, and we are forced to wait. In those moments, the modern world feels very fragile indeed. As we look to the future, there is talk of a third bore, or perhaps a high-speed rail link to relieve the pressure. But for now, the twin tubes of the Eisenhower and Johnson tunnels stand alone. They are the workhorses of the Rockies, agging but resilient, carrying the weight of the mountain and the weight of our modern lives with a stoic, concrete strength. They are the bridge between the pioneer past and the high-speed future, open 24 hours a day, welcoming us into the dark and guiding us back to the light. As we reach the end of this journey, emerging from the darkness of the tunnel into the blinding light of the present day, we are left with more than just a history of concrete and steel. The story of the Eisenhower Tunnel is a mirror. It reflects our ambition, our fears, and our unyielding desire to conquer the barriers that stand in our way. But what truly have we learned from this hole in the mountain? First, it teaches us about the nature of obstacles. To the early pioneers, the Continental Divide was a wall ordained by God, a boundary that defined the limits of their world. To the engineers of the 20th century, it was a problem to be solved with mathematics and dynamite. The tunnel reminds us that impossible is often just a word we use for things we haven't figured out yet. It is a monument to human stubbornness. When the rock squeezed and the steel buckled, the men didn't pack up and go home. They invented a new way to dig. They adapted. In our own lives, when we hit the squeezing ground, those moments where the pressure feels like it will crush us, we can look to the tunnel for a lesson in resilience. Sometimes you cannot go over the mountain. Sometimes you must go through it. Second, the tunnel teaches us about the price of connection. We live in an age where we expect connection to be instant and effortless. We click a button and we are connected to the other side of the world. We drive a car and we expect the road to be smooth. But the tunnel stands as a testament to the sweat, the blood, and the treasure required to forge those links. 7 men died so that we could save 30 minutes on a drive to Grandma's house. Billions of dollars were spent so that fresh peaches could get to Denver in January. Connection is never free. It is built on the sacrifices of those who came before us. We drive on their shoulders. There is also a lesson here about humility. For all our engineering prowess, for all our fans and sensors and heat detectors, we are still guests in the mountain's house. The rock is still there, pressing down with millions of tons of force, held back by a thin shell of concrete. The winter storms still rage outside the portals, capable of shutting down our grand interstate in an instant. The tunnel does not defeat nature. It merely negotiates a truce with it. It reminds us that our dominance over the planet is fragile. We build our little tubes and our little roads, but the mountain remains. It was there millions of years before us, and it will be there millions of years after our concrete has turned back to dust. And finally, the Eisenhower Tunnel asks us to consider what it means to be a united nation. Before the interstates, before the tunnels and the bridges, America was a collection of regions, isolated by geography. The tunnel physically stitched the country together. It made the concept of the West accessible to everyone. It turned a formidable barrier into a gateway. It poses a question to us today. What are the barriers that divide us now? They may not be made of granite. They may be barriers of ideology, of class, of culture. Do we have the same will, the same engineering spirit to bore through those walls? Do we have the courage to build tunnels through the things that separate us, just as Big E. Johnson and Dwight Eisenhower did? We drive these roads, but we also travel through history. Every time you hold your breath in the tunnel, you are participating in a ritual of passage. Every time you see the light at the end, you are experiencing a small rebirth. I often wonder what those early miners would think if they could stand by the roadside today. If they could see the stream of cars, the glowing screens of the GPS units, the families laughing on their way to a ski vacation. Would they feel that their sacrifice was worth it? I like to think they would. I like to think they would look at that steady flow of traffic, that river of humanity moving freely through the stone, and nod their heads. They were the ones who held up the mountain so we could pass. So the next time you find yourself driving west on I-70, approaching that dark moor in the side of the Rockies, don't just drive through. Feel it. Feel the weight of the rock. Feel the ghost of the wind on the pass above. And ask yourself, what would you have done if you faced this challenge? Would you have turned back? Or would you have picked up a shovel and started digging? Because in the end, the tunnel isn't just about getting to the other side. It's about the audacity to believe that there is another side and that we have the strength to reach it. Night falls differently at 11,000 feet. When the sun dips behind the Gore Range, the temperature plummets and the shadows lengthen until they swallow the valley's whole. In the old days, before the concrete and the steel, this darkness was absolute. It was a barrier that told humanity to stop, to turn back, to wait for the mercy of the dawn. But tonight, if you stand on the ridge above the Eisenhower Tunnel, you see a different story. You see a steady stream of red fading into the earth, and a stream of white headlights emerging from it. You see a pulse of light in the heart of the wilderness. We have spent the last hour traveling through time, from the muddy, treacherous wagon trails of the pioneers to the high-tech control rooms of the 21st century. We have walked in the footsteps of visionaries, like Big E. Johnson, who pounded his fist on a table and demanded a way through. We have felt the cold dampness of the pilot bore and heard the terrifying groan of the squeezing ground that threatened to crush the dreams of a generation. We have the 7 men who went into the mountain and never came home, and we have celebrated the millions of families who have passed through safely since. The Eisenhower Johnson Memorial Tunnel is more than just a marvel of civil engineering. It is a defining chapter in the autobiography of America. It represents that specific, golden moment in our history when we looked at the map, saw a blank space labeled impossible, and decided to build a road across it. It captures the spirit of the post-war era, a time of interstate highways, moon landings, and a belief that technology, applied with grit and courage, could improve the human condition. But it is also a reminder of the fragility of that condition. As we drive through that mile-and-a-half tube, we are suspended in a delicate balance. We are protected by the ingenuity of the engineers, but we are surrounded by the raw, indifferent power of the earth. It is a humbling place. It asks us to respect the land even as we traverse it. It reminds us that our dominance is temporary, but our connections, the roads that bind us to one another, are essential. As we close the book on this story, I want you to think about the roads you travel in your own life. Not just the physical highways, but the journeys you've taken, the obstacles you've faced, and the tunnels you've had to dig to get to the other side. History is not something that happened to other people in black and white photographs. It is happening now. You are part of this continuum. Every time you merge onto the interstate, every time you cross a state line, you are adding a verse to the song of the American road. It has been a privilege to guide you through the granite heart of the Rockies. These stories, the ones hidden in the concrete, the ones whispered in the wind on the high passes, are the stories that define who we are. They are the memories of a nation on the move. And our journey is far from over. Next time on American Memory Highways, we are going to trade the snow-capped peaks for the salt spray of the ocean. We are going to leave the roof of the world and travel to the very edge of the continent. Imagine a road that goes to sea. Imagine a highway that skips across open water, connecting a string of coral islands like pearls on a necklace. We will head south to the humid, sun-drenched expanse of the Florida Keys. We will uncover the tragic, ambitious history of Henry's railroad that went to sea and the hurricane that destroyed it. We will explore the overseas highway, a ribbon of concrete floating above the turquoise waters, a project that the ocean just as the Eisenhower the mountain. It is a story of robber barons, deadly storms, and the engineering marvel that lets you drive your car into the sunset. You won't want to miss it. If you enjoyed this journey through the Eisenhower Tunnel, if you felt the chill of the high country and the pride of the builders, please take a moment to like this video and share it with a friend who loves history. And if you haven't already, click that subscribe button and ring the bell. We have thousands of miles left to explore and so many more stories to tell. I'm your narrator, and this has been American Memory Highways. Until we meet again on the open road, keep your eyes on the horizon and remember, the journey is the destination. Drive safe.